discussing the issues surrounding families with parents, grandparents, or indeed the children themselves having been identified as clinically vulnerable and clinically extremely vulnerable, CV or CEV respectively. These families were at one point told to shield due to their vulnerabilities, due to the ongoing COVID crisis, but shielding, as many of you will know, was done away with some time ago. Discussing the ramifications of this, I have from SafeEd, we have Lisa, Sarah and Claire back once again. Fantastic to have you all back. We have another Socialist Telly familiar face back on tonight as well, Emmy from Shield Us. And we're also joined by Nikki from the Hive, a recovering blood cancer patient who is here to share her story. Welcome one and all. How has everyone's week been?
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, stressful. Very stressful.
I got a letter, Damo.
You got a letter. We're going to come on to your letter in a moment.
All right. Sorry, I love the horses.
We always start. We got into that. Well, I say we always start the show. We got into this habit of starting the show now by looking at an update or asking SafeEd for an update as to what has been going on over the course of the last week. I understand there's been some feedback from the Department for Education, a new Freedom of Information request, and some news on some ventilation trials. So it sounds like it's been rather busy. Who would like to fill us in? Sarah?
Okay, I'll go with the freedom of information thing. So I'll try and keep it as short as possible because I want to get on to Nikki and Emmy. Basically, on the 8th of June, I wrote to Department for Education and asked some questions. I think my main question was, please supply the report that was undertaken prior to the decision to no longer recommend masks on the 17th of May. Could you also provide details of who was involved in the consultation prior to this decision being made? For example, which epidemiologists, which teaching unions, which parent groups, which student groups, which building ventilation experts, and which medical experts. So I was quite demanding in what I asked for. They wrote back originally within the 20 days limit and told me they did have the information I asked for, but they couldn't yet release it. They were making a decision whether it was in the public interest. Okay, they told me they would reply to me by the 3rd of August. 3rd of August came and went. I then reminded them that they hadn't responded and got nothing back. So I wrote to the Information Commissioner's office and reported the fact that they had breached their own deadline. And lo and behold, the day after I did that reporting, I get a response. So the response, I'll try and keep it as succinct as possible. The response is out there on the SafeEd Twitter page for anyone to read in full.
13%.
Okay.
Is that Lisa in the background there?
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
I didn't know who it was. Anyway, I'll try and keep it very, very brief.
Sure.
They basically say that they made the decision to remove masks because the assessment against the 4 tests for step 3 were met, which we dispute that they were ever met. However, that's their reasoning. They tell me they consulted with lots of people. They consulted with SAGE. They don't say whether SAGE agreed with them. They say they did consult with some teaching unions. They don't specify who. They say they were informed by a couple of other reports and other things not specific to school about masks. And then they say that section 35(1)(a) means that information is exempt from being released because it's formulation of government policy. And they basically say they've decided it's not in the public's interest to release any further information about the decision to remove masks. Take from that what you will.
Well, that drives me mad. It drives me mad, actually, because formulation of policy, what policy? What are they announcing that are going to be put in place in schools in September? What have they said during these entire school holidays? Absolutely nothing. If they're formulating policy, then they're running out of time because schools are going to start going back very, very shortly in some parts of the country. Has Scotland gone back already?
They went back yesterday and today.
It does sort of indicate that there's actually no intention of doing anything whatsoever. This is obfuscation. This is just kicking it into touch and not wanting to deliver the information that you've asked for. And as for saying it's not public interest, well, I'm sorry. we wouldn't be making these programs. We wouldn't be on episode 4 of this caper if it wasn't public interest, because people watch this show. They watch it every week as it goes out. They want to know what's going on in schools. They're concerned about what their kids are going to be going through, what sort of circumstances they're going to be going back to school in. Are they going to be wearing masks? Are they not? Is there going to be hand gel on tap? Is there not? Are our kids going to get vaccinated even, which is another question that's being asked quite pertinently at this moment in time. It is public interest. I mean, come off it. It is a miserable, lazy excuse on the part of a government that really just doesn't want to be held to account.
Absolutely.
And that's where we're at. That's how I feel, certainly. I mean, I don't know about anybody else on the panel who wants to chip in on that.
Well, it leaves our CEV not having a clue how they even begin to fight for safe education for the children. It leaves our CEV families literally no idea what they're going to do, because you're going to have to make that phone call to the school and you don't know what the head teacher or what's being fed down through to the schools. And what we found all the way along this is for schools, it's a postcode lottery. But this makes it impossible for our CEV families to even formulate, sit down as a family and go, right, we're going to ask for remote learning, or we're going to, there's no way to make this plan. We're sitting right now in this state of anxiety because we can all read, we can all see the numbers, we can all see the cases, we can see the children that have died, the children that are in hospital right now, the number of long COVID cases. We can see all of this. We know, I say it all the time, we know our own health. We know our own child's health. We cannot make a plan for our child's next academic year. Because what policy? Where is the policy? Show us it so we can look at it and then go and try and work with our schools. Show us it.
I mean, and this is going back, this was asking historically, this isn't asking about their policy now. This was a freedom of information request so that we can understand the rationale that as Delta was rising, as the increasing in infections were happening, they made a policy decision to remove the recommendation that masks could be worn only optionally, only by secondary school students in classrooms. They made that decision to remove that recommendation, and all we're asking for, we're the public, we're parents. If it's not in my interest, I don't understand whose interest it is in then.
It's their child's interest. It's in every child in the country's interest to know why that decision's been made.
With SafeEd, with Shielders, with the Hive, with everybody else who we're involved with, we're making reasonable requests. We are never asking for something that is impossible, unattainable, unachievable. We are asking for reasonable requests, and a reasonable request was, can you tell us how you arrived at this decision, please? And they can't tell us. They can give us a vague, we've consulted with lots of people. Okay, name them. Tell me who. Let me have a look at their backgrounds, their knowledge, what affiliations they may have, because my suspicion, the reason why they won't release it is because there was some involvement from people like Us For Them, Art Group, other people like that. Now, if they release that report and it's there, then we have something to say. If there's nothing like that there, then release it.
There's been no feedback from Sage in any way, shape, or form that to acknowledge that they've been consulted, and whether or not they're in agreement. Quite often they don't agree. They're just scientists after all. What do they know? But the teaching unions, I mean, there's only so many of them. There's no reason why perhaps you couldn't ask them yourself directly. Have you had anything to do with the government? Have you been consulting on school policy ahead of September? Have they spoken to you at all? Because I guarantee I know what the answer will be. But of course, it'll then undermine the entire freedom of information request that you've asked. Why not go to the teaching unions, see if they, I mean, I'm sure they will give some feedback. I'm sure there's some members of the teaching unions that may well be watching this tonight that would quite happily feedback to you and your organisation. You're all working fundamentally for the safety of our children and the education of our children. You'd figure you're all on the same side on this, quite frankly. So, yeah, if any of the teaching unions, if anyone who is in a teaching union or works for one of the teaching unions and wants to chip in on whether or not the government have been consulting with your particular union or not, and you'd like to get in touch with SafeEd and just let them know whether they have or not, I'm sure that would be appreciated, really. It is, you mentioned the Delta variant has been, it's already been mentioned. It has become far more prevalent across the country over the course of this year. It does appear to be affecting more younger people, children, and of course the argument's long been that they spread it, including to vulnerable family members. Arguments have consistently been made that children don't need vaccination, yet we're seeing other countries plan vaccination programs for children as young as 5. There's been this sort of compromise move suggested to vaccinate over 16s now, but as far as I'm aware, that's only with 1 dose. Why is this country being so hard-headed about this, especially in light of more and more children themselves becoming very ill? And is there any science to back up 1 jab being sufficient for kids? Or is there something else going on that they aren't telling us?
And a new variant out today, Christina Pagels mentioned that there's a variant called AY3, which is Delta with knobs on, that has been causing a lot of the cases in the southern states of America, and it's really bad.
Really bad, and it's affecting children.
Much worse.
It's affecting everybody much worse. And as a CEV person, I'm not going to lose my temper.
Right.
I have been shielding for over 550 days. My whole family, my children, everybody has been shielding with me. We have shielded from the first wild COVID. When it first arrived, we were told, you're clinically extremely vulnerable. Your life is in danger. Shelter in place, basically, shelter in place. Stay home and shield. We're now, as I said, we went and shielded a couple of weeks early because we were already doing our version of quarantine to protect my son because he was so ill with aspirational pneumonia. We were keeping him safe from anything else that was going around, and we were already in what we used to call quarantine. And then we were given a name for it, shielding. I spoke to a lot of people over the past few weeks, and people, clinically vulnerable people, are trying to make peace with the fact we're going to get it now. People who are double jabbed don't have to self-isolate. Our world has just become so much smaller, and it was already small. If you're shielding, you're living in a very, very, very small world. For the kids going back to school, I feel again that our CEV have been completely ignored. We have been told shielding no more. Now we've got Delta variant. Now we've got this new variant that's been being watched for a couple of weeks now, and it is COVID. It is Delta with bells on. How are our children, which is a legal right, it is a right, a human right, how are they meant to access safe education? How are we meant? My children have not been at school since March. Well, one of them, February last year, March last year. They have been home. They have not had education. We were lucky. Our school has been incredible. But the way the public are being told that it's over and getting back to normal, we don't have a normal. How are we meant to have a normal? And how are we meant to put our children, knowing Delta variant is affecting our children, whether you're CEV or not, nobody should be forced in this position. But we cannot plan for our futures right now, because right now our futures and our world has just become a hell of a lot smaller, and we are never mentioned once. Where's our CMOs? Our chief medical officers, they're meant to be the ones in charge of our health. They're the ones that are meant to be keeping us safe. Where are they? We don't exist. And it's
inconvenience. That's how you're being treated. That's how, well, to myself, from looking from the outside as a non-CEV person, I'm seeing how you're all being treated, and you're being treated as an inconvenience. Oh, those people again. Oh, the immunosuppressed. Oh, the people on cancer treatments. Oh, a range, neurological symptoms, people who have neurological illnesses who are higher risk of being admitted. They're an inconvenience. You're all an inconvenience.
We always have been.
Away and let the rest of the world go on, because COVID's over, don't you know? That's how
Half of us aren't even on lists.
I can't even imagine how it feels to you.
And it's also I think the real kicker is it's not just the fact that we are an inconvenience, it's that whenever you speak to people, it's sort of like, well, 45 of those that died today, well, they all had underlying conditions, like you don't matter, you know, and it's like, oh yeah, don't forget they were all ill anyway. And you sort of think, well actually, that doesn't mean we weren't entitled to another 40 years of life, or, you know, and there's very much a sort of a narrative that everybody who's vulnerable is elderly, sat at home on huge benefits, and they can just shut their door, when in fact their children, parents, doctors, teachers, you know, and the sort of the attitude of, we'll just stay home then, you know, we can't, we have mortgages and bills to pay and jobs to do, but it is just that we're written off, you know, well, if you go away we won't have an issue. And that's what I think is most upsetting.
It's really, really difficult when you hear that, we'll just stay home then. Really? Really? Just stay home then. Right, so I've been doing that for over 550 days. I'll just continue to do that, shall I? Instead of this government step up and do the right thing and get this under control, because other countries can do it. Mm-hmm. But the fact that we are ignored, the fact that we are talked about in a derogatory way, like we're holding the country back. Well, now, this isn't new.
The government has withdrawn these letters. They've withdrawn the notion of shielding. They've legislated you out of existence as far as they're concerned. They're not concerned that your lives have not moved on. They've moved on. So that's all that matters. Back to normal. Let's get everybody back to work, back to school. Everything as it was. Isn't everything wonderful? No, it bloody isn't.
No, it's not.
They've been warned about this. They've been, you know, this variant that you've talked about today that's just popped up. They have been warned this would happen if they did not lock down properly. We've had to have national lockdowns on 3 occasions now to date, and still they will not learn from the mistakes they've made that have led to them having to do this 3 times. I mean, having to do it once because this thing has come up and it's caught the planet by surprise. Great, fine, learn from it. They haven't done it because it's an inconvenience to them. Anybody who's not economically active is an inconvenience.
No, and when they were doing the simulation, when Jeremy Hunt was health secretary, I think at the time, they were doing the simulation on a COVID-like virus with world leaders. And they were in the game room and playing out what would happen, who would respond, who could do what, how they were going to do it, and they wrote the plan for a pandemic coming. They didn't once factor in people who would be clinically vulnerable to that virus. In that simulation, not one person in that room thought, well, wait a minute, there could be people who are already in a position with their health where this would affect them more, and how do we help them? So is it any wonder when it came to COVID, it was go home, shielding, now all of yous go away.
That's because there's so few of us in politics.
That's exactly the point I was about to make. There's barely any representation, if any at all, from people who have long-term disabilities, long-term illnesses. There are 1 or 2 I can think of in Parliament that have issues, but it's whether they put them first. I mean, one of the ones that I'm thinking of is Robert Halfon. But of course, we were discussing him last week and the organisation he's actually got himself involved with. And he just makes you want to scream, because this is a man who legitimately should know better.
It's really difficult. And I'm also hearing something really, really desperately concerning. I'm hearing of clinically vulnerable people having their CEV status removed by occupational health. Now, I'm really concerned for our teachers, our school staff. I know this is happening. I know it's happened to quite a few people who work in public transport. And this is where I'm hearing it from, that they have decided that they've gone for their occupational health, they've done their personal risk assessment, and they have now had their CEV status removed at work. They're no longer deemed clinically vulnerable at work, although clinically, they are clinically extremely vulnerable. So what is going to happen to our teachers and our school staff here? The school's gone back.
They're forced to go back in. My son, one of my son's science teachers, she was teaching remotely for a significant length of time. I was wondering whose dog that was.
Sorry, yeah, I've got a really noisy dog right now.
She was shielding, because she was clinically vulnerable. But the moment those letters were withdrawn, she had to return to work in order to teach. And that's the risk they've had to take. It's absolutely chronic. There's nobody in Parliament speaking up for this right now. However, that said, Lisa has had a letter from her MP, which at least acknowledges that some people are giving some thought to this. So, Lisa, do you want to talk to us about the letter you've received from your MP?
Yeah, I'll read you the bit that's kind of interesting, really. So I've moved just 20 minutes down the road. So Lisa Nandy is no longer my MP. It's Rosie Cooper, so another Labour MP. So the first thing I did was wrote to her, told her about, the appalling way that I've been treated and flagging it up to, that it's very common. I won't go on about it, but threats of fines, prosecution, social services, ankle tags, all of that nonsense. So I told her about that. And I just said about my grave concerns that we're sending our kids back into school with the crummy, crappy little mitigations what they had last year. Basically, the only one that was any good was masks in secondary. Even that is being removed. So no bubbles, certainly no masks, no nothing. Hand gel and hand washing. That is your lot. So I wrote to her, saying about this and, the effect that it's having on children. We've only got a glance over to the States to see what's coming for us. I don't know if anyone else saw, it was an attorney in Texas, and it was in Dallas, Texas. And he said all the pediatrician ICU beds, they're all completely full now. So we're in a situation now in the United States, in Dallas, Texas, where one child has to die for another one to get a bed. And that's because of COVID. Okay, so this is coming for us. The schools have only been open 2 weeks. So, Fauci, who else do you want? Fauci, for God's sake, has, sounded the alarm bells and said, we have got to protect our children. We've got to vaccinate them and have masks when they're vaccinated. There's bugger all here. Nothing. We're not giving them masks. We're not giving them vaccines. We're not social distancing. We're doing absolutely naff all. And, it's an absolute... I'm getting so angry now because it's so obvious. We have to protect our children. We have to protect everyone but the children, for God's sake. Anyway, so the good news, if it is a little bit of good news, because we've got to take our positives when we can, haven't we? So Rosie Cooper wrote back, and the interesting bit that she said was, I share your worries that the government is underestimating the impact of the Delta variant, which has exploded the dangerous myth that children are somehow immune to COVID. Now, that it says a lot, that I'm quite excited about that a little bit, that for once I'm not being gaslighted. So a Labour MP once again has shared my worries, all of our worries, that the Delta variant, that the world's worries, that we're underestimating the impact of Delta on children, and it's exploded the myth that children are somehow immune. Right, so what are we going to do about it? So we've got an MP here admitting, it's we've the government are underplaying it, but what's being done? Where's the HEPA air filters? What are we going to do about ventilation? Nothing. There's a trial on in Bradford in 30 schools. Why on earth are we doing a trial 18 months into a pandemic? We know we need bloody ventilation. Why are we trialing it? I can't get me, honestly, I can't express my anger, my frustration, because we're being lied to over and over again. We're being made out that we're like neurotic parents. We're not neurotic. This is, it's life and death. it's not only kids have always suffered from COVID. They suffer from long COVID at a similar rate to adults. We've always known this, but you know, this Delta variant and all the experts that are trying to work out, is it because so many kids are getting, you know, infected, or is it because there's something about this variant that is more lethal to kids that is making them have it? But whatever it is, we protect them. You know, poor Emmy, God knows how she, like for me, I mean, I've got a genetic blood disorder, but I'm not classed as clinically vulnerable or clinically extremely vulnerable. Although I have got this like thing where I've got sticky blood. So, you know, it could make me have a blood clot and this, that, and the other. But for me and my kids, it's like playing Russian roulette. So we might be okay, but we might not be. But I don't want to play Russian roulette with my health. Yeah. And then, you know, for people who are clinically extremely vulnerable, you know, like it's like I can't imagine the stress and worry that you're under, because it is like a death sentence. I don't understand why we're not up in arms.
Have you heard what happened in Texas? You know, the governor in Texas refused to allow masks in schools, and it's all gone absolutely abysmal. Abbott has now been rushed into hospital with COVID.
Karma's a bitch, isn't it? You know, and it's I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, but it's just you couldn't make it up, could you?
But that's what's taken though. For a lot of people, they've got to contract it.
Or somebody they know has.
Unless it affects them, they don't know it.
It's this I'm all right, Jack attitude, isn't it? It only happens to other people. Well, it doesn't. Well, it doesn't until it happens to you.
No.
We've all heard it, haven't we, Lisa? Throughout the pandemic, it's all, I don't know anyone who's had it. I don't know anyone who's had it and not recovered straight away. All that kind of rhetoric that comes out from all of the people screaming about freedoms. You can have your bloody freedom. Just mitigate, you know. Sensible mitigation, wearing a mask when you're indoors, mixing with other households, keeping some kind of social distancing, keeping ventilation has to be a priority. They're all agreeing now that everyone's looking on shouting about ventilation. What you bloody
Where are they? What are you going to do about it? Bring them in. Do something about it. If you need ventilation, then let's have the ventilation. And isn't it fantastic if you haven't met anybody or know anybody who has had it? You've seen daily figures put out by the government, day after day, week after week, month after month, numbers on a screen telling you people have had it. And that people have succumbed to it.
I know.
I'm not sure how much more real it needs to become for people before they accept this as something that's significant. The problem
is, and I don't know if you agree with this, Nikki, but the problem is everybody thinks it's somebody who's got an underlying health condition that passes away.
Yeah.
And
that's okay in the first place, but
this isn't new. This is not new in this country. Being a health advocate 12 years now. This isn't new. We've always been pitted against the healthy. We've always been that drain on society. It's always been a thing. And again, if it doesn't touch your life, then you do until it touches your life. When suddenly somebody becomes ill in your family, you're online looking for support just to speak to somebody so you feel like you're sane, because you can only understand it. You know, it's finding that person who understands it, and you know what I'm talking about because you're living it too. And I never knew this existed. No, you didn't, because we haven't got a country who actually looks after their vulnerable or their minorities. That went out the window. And that's something, health inequality has always been a thing in this country. Our minorities, our towns, our cities, this is nothing new. The problem is, this is in the middle of a pandemic. And yes, I am sitting here right now, and I don't know what's going to happen this winter. I live in Northern Ireland. I know that in Northern Ireland, we've just had to upscale and surge our ICUs. But I also know there's a festival going on right now in the town centre, big festival in the town centre of Belfast. The same city where they're having to upscale and beg people to come in who are on leave or come in now. We have had 3 of our 5 hospital trusts declare an emergency because there's no beds. Northern Ireland, we have already got a massive shortage of beds and nurses before COVID. This winter scares me. I am more frightened now than I have ever been throughout this whole pandemic. You know, I'm not the only one feeling like this. Now, I managed to get this far without COVID coming into my home. For how much longer? I have a child with special needs. If he was an adult, he would be classed clinically extremely vulnerable because he has learning disabilities. He is a child. We don't know if he is clinically extremely vulnerable. But if he was an adult, he would be classed as clinically extremely vulnerable. I have another child who is one of those people and children in this country who doesn't fit on the list. Nobody will put him on it. Nobody's willing to do it. I know my son, and I've sat by my son's ICU bed more times than any parent should. He's beaten the odds, and by God, he is strong. I don't know what would happen to him if he caught COVID, because I know if he catches the flu, it takes him about a year to recover from it. Now, we're coming into winter and I'm expected to put my children into school. I don't know what is going to happen. I know, again, I'm in Northern Ireland. We do things very, very differently here when it comes to children not attending school. It's full social services. It is the works. It's not just a fine. We don't fine. It's full court. It's full social services investigations. I know families here who were threatened on their doorstep to have a full Section 47 done on their family with a social worker, an education and welfare officer, and police if their children didn't attend school that day. Both parents, clinically extremely vulnerable, had no choice. This is real life for us. This isn't just, well, they had an underlying health condition.
Mm-hmm. No.
We are real people.
And I think the school thing as well, I mean, just a little bit of background is I was diagnosed with blood cancer in October 2019. And then 2 months later, my 17-year-old daughter was diagnosed with uterine cancer and had to have a full hysterectomy, and her chemo started just before the pandemic hit. So our family of four, two of us were both going through chemotherapy when the pandemic hit. And I don't think people realise with shielding that the letters we had were: pack a bag, have you signed your will, pack a bag with the things that you need. If you need fresh air, sit by an open window, don't even put your dustbin out. So this is the level that we were put at of fear and concern. I have a perfectly healthy partner who had to drive myself and my daughter to chemotherapy appointments, so he was asked to shield. And I have a very healthy, fit, active 11-year-old boy who suddenly his mum has cancer, his sister has cancer. Oh my God, there's a global pandemic that's going to kill them. And we tried very much to temper, you know, we're not lunatics. We didn't sit him in front of the news and let him watch Sky News on repeat. We tried to explain to him we would be, you know, we should be fine. And he made a very difficult decision that he didn't want to lose either of us and he would shield. And we were quite lucky in that our school, he was year 6 at primary school, incredibly supportive, no issues at all. What we needed, we got. And he's going into year 7 of a comprehensive, which terrifies me because it's a very tiny village school. And I think one of the single most thing that drives me insane is that all we ever hear is that shielding, lockdown, wearing masks is mentally abusive to children. Well, I have an 11-year-old boy who actually is terrified of going to school because he doesn't want to bring it home. He's not worried about himself. Doesn't want to bring it home. He doesn't want to lose his mum. He doesn't want to lose his sister. And going to school every single day, knowing there's a chance that he could take that home to our family, weighs so heavily. And there are so many children and they never discuss that mental issue side of it. And it's huge. And our cancer actually said to us, if he's forced to go to school, you could break him and we may not be able to fix him. Now, I want him to go and he wants him to go. And I know that the school would let him remote learn, but why should he? Why should he? He's missed out on a year and a half of football and messing around with friends and science projects and all the stuff that schools offer. And I could take him out, but why should he? Why should he? Because we were unlucky enough to get cancer. have to miss out? Why can they not make it safe for these children? Because why are they in this situation? Because the mental health side of it for them is too much. And he's already saying, if they won't let me wear a mask, I'm walking out. And he's 11.
Yeah, it's the untold story. It's an untold story of mental health. Actually, there is so much talk. There has been so much talk about the mental health issues that affect children, and the thought that, oh, well, if they don't go, then they're going to miss out. It's going to damage their mental health if they're not able to interact with their friends. They're not able to get an education as standard. But actually, there are children whose family circumstances mean that should they be sent to school with the issues surrounding COVID and the lifting of restrictions flying in the face of any common sense or logic or scientific advice, that actually it'll make their mental health worse. And I think you've raised a fantastically valid point there, Nikki, and I'm so sorry that you've gone through such an awful time on top of everything that everybody else has had to go through with COVID as well. It sounds like you've been through the mill, something awful. So I do wish you and your family the very best, and thank you for sharing your story with us. It's diabolical, frankly, isn't it? I mean,
Shieldus are the only place that supply free mental health support to our clinically extremely vulnerable in the UK. That's what we do. That's what we started out to do, was a recognised symbol, something to wear. Something to wear that was very, very clear, that said, give me space, I am clinically vulnerable. Is what our founder started it out by, because her child has an invisible, very, very serious illness. Was a symbol for people to wear, where it says, give me space. Because you would look at me and think that I'm clinically extremely vulnerable. A lot of children, you wouldn't look at them and think they are clinically extremely vulnerable.
Prove what their health issues are.
No, so Nina came up with the logo and started selling we've got hospital trusts supplying our lanyards to their clinically vulnerable staff and patients, and from there, everything we make from that goes into supplying these mental health support sessions. We're actually having to formulate a support group for children right now with our counsellors. I'm in the same position as I have got one child who I don't know if I'm ever going to get him to be able to go back to school for fear of his health, because he knows what it's like to be chronically ill and in a hospital bed for years. Then I've got my other son. He is terrified of bringing it home. He is absolutely terrified. He has been suicidal 3 times. 3 times throughout this pandemic. And he's terrified at the thought of going to school, but there is no support. There is absolutely no support. We were put into shielding. We had all these scary texts coming through our phones, and depending on what doctor you spoke to, depended on whether the advice changed or not. There's no support package being put in place for our clinically extremely vulnerable. And just because they want to get on with it and think Freedom Day and think that, we're all back to normal, according to the Public Health Agency. So where's the support for the people who are still clinically extremely vulnerable?
Well, you should,
and for the people who are just
need it anymore, should you? We have wonderful vaccines now, and they're the panacea. They're fixing everything, and there's lots of people that believe that.
I'm severely
injections. Nobody's got anything to worry about anymore.
No, I'm severely immunosuppressed. I've been told the vaccines aren't going to work for me. Even the third one, they're a bit might not. No information, no guidance, no data being done, no data gathering being done for clinically extremely vulnerable, and no help or support, as Nikki said, for the people who are being told today they are clinically extremely vulnerable.
That's it. Being diagnosed with cancer pre the pandemic, it was just the cancer. When my daughter got diagnosed, it was the cancer and COVID. And what is happening to these people that are getting a diagnosis today, that they're going to start chemo, they're going to have a transplant, all these other things that people don't understand. There is nothing there, there is no support network that tells you what you need to do. And it's shocking because, if you're already facing something, down the barrel of a gun like that, to then think, well, the second I walk out of here, how am I supposed to live my life? If I work in a shop, I can't go shopping at night, which is what our current advice is. Things like stay away from unvaccinated people, didn't realise that they were wearing a sign.
Badge, look.
Yeah.
That's magic,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
Go to shops in the evening, which is fine if you don't work in one or you don't have children. You know, all these things, they're all just suggestions, which, to be honest with you, are frankly useless, because
Yeah.
staying away from people, you can't, you know, and it's shielding by default, but it absolves them of any responsibility because it puts it back on us. And I have to make a heartbreaking decision with, I want my son to go and enjoy school like an 11-year-old boy, and I want to get his dirty football kit home every other week. And I look at him and I think, I just want so much for him to go out and be a kid and enjoy it. But I know if he brought it home, that he would never forgive himself, even if we had, you know, we were okay. And I know that he would shield if I asked him to. And I just completely am split in half between he must go, he must go, he must go. But what if? Because you don't get a second chance.
No.
You know, if you catch it and the outcome is bad,
It shouldn't be a decision. It shouldn't be a decision you should have to make. There should be the government should intervene and make a decision one way or the other. Lisa, you've been looking to come back in.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about just another aspect. Those kids that go into school without any health problems catch COVID and end up CEV. Because there's a little lad in Wigan. He goes to he's a friend of a friend's son, and he goes to a school in Pemberton, Wigan, or he went, and his school was forever his bubble was being sent home, but he was never tested for COVID because he never had any symptoms, asymptomatic. And then at some point earlier this year, he started deteriorating with his health, like ridiculous temperatures of 40 odd, all different kinds of symptoms. Anyway, cutting a long story short, this lad who was previously healthy, nothing wrong with him, he's on drugs now for cancer patients. He'll never be the same again. He's now classed as clinically extremely vulnerable, and the medics have said he's suffering from long COVID. He's caught COVID at school, asymptomatic. Months they couldn't work out what it was, but his school has been riddled. Wigan's been riddled with COVID, but his school in particular. So that is what the medical professionals have come down to. And that little lad's, you know, he's got to live with that for his life. He was 7 or 8 years old. He was. So when we talk about children's mental health, you know, Nikki said it. We want our kids in school, but it all comes back to the same answer. Well, make them safe then. You shouldn't have to choose between your children's education and social life and their health. And we're not talking a bit of flu. We're talking about them potentially being disabled for life.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my point. It's just a nonsense. Keep going on about mental health. We know that kids, you know, most kids do benefit from being in school. We all want our kids in school. Same argument, make it safe.
Yeah, it's not a lot to ask. We just want our kids to be educated, but safely. Why is that such a challenge? Why is that such an argument we're having to have with our government? It's crazy. Now, I understand Public Health England have put out a statement relating to anxiety in clinically extremely vulnerable people, relating to where we are now in our national response to COVID. What have they said, and how is this being received?
They said, stop being so anxious about COVID and work on your mental health.
Oh, is that?
No,
wow.
It's your problem. It's your
That's
mental
Public
health.
England, I'll just reiterate.
That was Public Health England, but I thought, I mean, that is an utterly ridiculous piece of messaging. The other thing we've been doing is we've been getting people to make little 2-minute videos online and putting them on Safe Ed for All and asking people to hashtag them Swarm, because the other positive thing this week, apart from public health and negative messaging, was that we had a bit of an international swarm. We had an international swarm going on because we were working with the French École Oubliée, and we did a Sécuriser nos écoles and Safe Ed for All, international swarm, and it worked really brilliantly. And we were getting people coming in from Quebec, from Mexico. So there are parents all around the world having the same decisions to make, and a lot of them with no mitigations in place. The French are up in arms because Macron's threatening to do the same as here. So, and it seems that their public health messaging is just as bad as ours, but you should have seen the comments on the Public Health England post today. I mean, there were doctors going, yeah, because that's anxiety in the middle of a world pandemic, isn't it? You know, how are you not going to be anxious when your government's doing, frankly, nothing, really?
I can come in, I can read the Public Health England thing, it's here. So the tweet they put out today was, as COVID-19 restrictions ease, some of us may be feeling a bit anxious. The Every Mind Matters website shares 11 tips to cope with anxiety about returning back to normal. Now, bear in mind that returning back to normal, okay, isn't the same for everyone. So I think tip one, hang on, turn the sound down. Tip one, go at a pace that suits you. Okay. Tip two, take time to relax. Tip three, learn to manage unhelpful thoughts. And then get more tips from this website. Like, how helpful is that to someone who either, in any of our situations, whether you are clinically vulnerable, clinically extremely vulnerable yourself, whether your child is, or whether your children have underlying conditions or don't have underlying conditions, but you don't want them to have? How are any of those top 3 tips there helpful when the choices we have at the minute, as we've all said, is send your children to an indoor setting that has no mitigations for an airborne virus, or keep them at home, remote educating, refuse to deregister and lose their school place and face fines, prosecution threats, safeguarding referrals, or deregister your child like 40,000, I think they said, extra have done this year. Claire's one of them. And it's not elective home education. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If you decide that is right for your family, that you want to no longer be part of the school system and you want to educate at home, that's perfectly brilliant choice for lots and lots of families. They do it for lots of reasons. However, being forced to do that because the setting they should be in isn't safe, that's not elective home education. That's coerced deregistration, and that's actually illegal. So,
especially when you're fighting your own health and trying to educate your child.
And it puts a lot on the children, because like I say, I know without hesitation my son would shield, and he's very excited. And I just, as a CV person, I actually feel responsible, probably over emotionally so, that I am putting a child in this situation, that I am possibly going to take all of those sort of social things away from him. And as a parent, you don't want to harm your children in any way. And I know I'm not harming him, but it breaks my heart to think that because of me, he's having to sort of look at school and think, should I go? Should I really? Is it okay for me to go? You know, will I get the blame if something happens? Because he is only 11 and he's trying to make sense of all this. And it breaks my heart. It really does break my heart.
You haven't put him in that position. Our government is forcing you into that position because they will not take the necessary steps, put into place the necessary mitigations to protect families like yours, like Claire's, like mine. My wife is CEV as well. It's and Emmy, of course, other families. There's so many families, so many people were sent letters saying you are clinically vulnerable, you are clinically extremely vulnerable, and they just overnight just did away with the entire thing for no good reason whatsoever.
That's where the public health thing today really got my back up, I'm not going to lie, because, okay, so you're acknowledging that there is anxiety in the UK as things go back to normal, whatever that means. Yeah. Where are you for our clinically extremely vulnerable? If you can understand that normal everyday people, because obviously we're not classed in the normal everyday people, you know, scenario, because we never have been. recognize that normal, everyday people are going to have some anxiety about going back to normal coming out of this pandemic. We're still in this pandemic. We have no going back to normal. You have abandoned us. You put us into shielding to protect our lives. And now you've put our lives back in our hands with no support to do it. And what Nikki said right there, I feel the same for my children. I want my children in school. I really do. I would give anything. Well, my youngest wouldn't agree with me on this one because he don't like school. It's a difficult place for him to be. He has special needs and school is just so overstimulating for him. But I have fought for years for this school place. Years. And next month, I might have to deregister both of my children, one who's away to do the transition for special needs children through to adulthood, and my other son, my youngest son, who is going to have a fantastic chance at education and a fantastic chance of actually being in a supported learning environment. But this government will not make it safe for him to be there.
We don't even have a minister. We only found out by accident through one of the mainstream media that when Jenny Harries, who was responsible for the CEV, stepped down into her or went to her new position, that actually nobody within Parliament or government was responsible for the CEV people. So that's why we weren't getting anything, because nobody was touching this hot potato. It was always, well, that's not my department. That's not my department. And we're still not 100% sure. The APPG for People Vulnerable to Pandemics has actually given us a name of Nadine Dorries. We don't know whether that was sort of pre-pandemic that she was responsible for vulnerable people in general, but basically she has been written to, and as yet I certainly have had nothing or heard nothing.
Shieldus hasn't had anything back
so,
either.
You know, we have ministers for absolutely everything, but for this group of 4+ million people, nobody is responsible. The buck doesn't stop anywhere. So we are just shouting into a void.
But you're not shouting into a void through us. We are here to give you that platform. We're here to give you a chance to inform people as to what on earth is going on. And when, as you say, the government is completely derelict in its duty now, when you're not actually getting feedback from the ministers in question. Shamefully for them, I hope people who are listening to this and are equally appalled as we are about that, they get on and message Ms. Dorries about this and ask her what on earth she's playing at, not doing her job properly. This is another reason why we, of course, are doing the show that we are doing, and it's fantastic to see Shield Us and SafeEd collaborating under the heading of the Hive. And I hope people will continue to follow Shield Us, SafeEd, and now to follow the Hive to keep abreast of everything that is going on with this situation. And we, of course, will be back again next week for another SafeEd show. Thank you very much to all of my guests for joining me today.
Thank you.
Take care. We'll catch you next week.